had time to get into lots of trouble over the years, as anyone who's got to a certain age has, but I never, it was one of my oddest things that I've ever done, I think, was to be the chaplain of the largest men's prison in Maryland. I left in January 2010. But it was not my idea to become the chaplain at the largest men's prison in Maryland. No, it was not. I was asked not long after the last chaplain left. First of all, it was Marcus. He was the inmate pastor. There's a very vibrant Protestant church, 600-man church behind the walls of this prison. It even has a seminary, all paid for by outside funds. I had volunteered in the chapel. I'm a minister. I'd volunteered, and so I knew him, and he asked me. And then a person who played a very pivotal role in the prison administration, they asked me several times to apply. And then my pastor, he told me that he thought I should apply. And I thought to myself, are they crazy? Can't they see I am not prison chaplain material? I'm creative. I'm a free spirit. I can't be bound by bars. But of course I didn't say that to them. I told them all I'd pray about it. And when I did, I thought, oh no, this is a God thing. And I felt like an old war horse facing the next battle. And then I did what many of you have already done or would do if you're facing a very difficult situation, a situation that you know is going to be hard, that you know is going to be bloody. I plunged in anyway, just as you would do. And so I applied for the job, and I got it. But it was a government position, so it was frozen for several months. And when I started it, the administration had taken all the heads of the chapel. So the pastor, the assistant pastor, the head of the ministers' board, the head of the deacons' board, the head of the choirs, they'd taken all those leaders and shipped them out to another prison on the other side of Maryland in Cumberland. Well, the remaining congregants were in shock. And then they were also grieving the loss of their last chaplain, who was an African-American pastor. He'd been there for 16 years, and he'd started the church. And so at the beginning and end of services, the inmates, the men, they would gather and they would glower. And I'd hear them saying things like, don't want a woman chaplain, shouldn't be a female chaplain. It says in the word that a woman shouldn't have authority over a man. I don't want a female chaplain. Well, as you can imagine, this got a little old. And so at the end of one of the services in the chapel, I addressed the congregation. And I said, gentlemen, I believe you know that the Lord has given me a great love for you. And there were nods all over that room because they knew that was true. And I said, gentlemen, I believe you know that within the confines of the law, I would do anything I could to help you. And again, there were nods all over that room because they knew that was true. I said, well, gentlemen, there's two things I can't do for you. I can't be a man and I can't be black, so get over it. And they too had the grace to laugh. But the correctional officers, the guards, they didn't want me either. Often when I came into the facility, there would be clumps of them. And I'd hear them muttering things like, don't want a female chaplain, shouldn't be a woman chaplain, it's a safety issue, it's not safe to have a female chaplain, I don't want a woman chaplain. And if any of them said it to my face, which they did, I'd say, officer, it wasn't my idea, take it up with the Almighty. But I realized I could not change in the way they all wanted me to change. I couldn't be a man. So I thought, well, Geraldine, what have you got going for you? Now, I'm a compassionate, motherly kind of figure, and many of those men have been raised by their mothers and certainly by their grandmothers. And then I'm British, which means I make a fabulous cup of tea. So I thought, Mama, go with what you've got. And I got permission to take an electric tea kettle into the prison, and I was determined that I was going to build a community behind the bars. And so on cold winter nights, when the officers were guarding in the compound, I would rush out and I'd say, officers, may I make you tea? I want to turn you all into Englishmen. And they would smile, and eventually they softened. And then I made tea on every occasion possible for the men, particularly the leadership team. Now, with the prayers and help of many volunteers, I was raising up a new ministry team to take over the one that had been shipped off to the other prison. And so I would often have groups of about 8 to 10 men, big, beefy men in my office. And I brought in lots of different kinds of tea so the men would have the luxury of choice. And I'd say, Prince, what kind of tea would you like? Chaplain, can't you remember my favourite kind of tea? Ooh, let me see. You like lemon verbena with 2 sugars? Yeah, you got that right. Manny, what kind of tea would you like? Chaplain, have you forgotten? Oh no, let me see. You like blackcurrant with 3 sugars? Yeah, you remembered. Big Mike, what would you like? Chaplain. Ooh, chamomile with 1 sugar. Yeah. I made hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of cups of tea. But one day things changed. Michelin Man, who was known as MM, was a young man who really loved his mother, and I knew him well because he volunteered in the prison. Well, one day his mother was taken seriously ill and she was shipped off to a hospital, and because of prison regulations, he couldn't phone her there. And so I gave him a phone call in my office on my private line. And I got through to the nurses' station. And she told me that his mother had just been taken down to the emergency room to have an emergency operation. Now, she must have had somebody in the system, because this has never happened to me before or since, but they patched me through to the operating room where his mother was already on the table with the anaesthetic going into her, and they let her speak to her son. And I heard him say, "I love you, Ma Bird." And he told me very shyly afterwards that she'd responded, "I love you too. Tweet, tweet." That was their private love code. And that was the last time that MM ever spoke to his mother, because she died later that night. And he was devastated. And he wasn't eligible to go to the funeral on the outside in Baltimore. And so I bent all sorts of rules. And I told him to give me the names of six guys that he knew who knew Ma Bird. And I arranged that we would have a funeral in my office at the same time as the one going on the outside. Well, the men gathered and they started to pay tribute to Ma Bird. One of them said, "I'm so glad I knew her on the outside. She was a great cook. I love being invited to your house for dinner." And another said, "Well, I don't know what I'd have done without your mum. She was so good to me when my mother died. I don't think I could have got through it without her." And another said, "Well, I only knew Ma Bird here in the prison when she was in the visiting room, when she was coming to see you. And if I was there, she'd always have a kind word for me. And that smile, I'm going to miss that smile." And then they sang Amazing Grace in 4-part harmony, and my office became holy ground. And then I tried something that I didn't know whether they'd go for or not. I had brought in small bottles of bubbles that were left over from my niece's birthday party. And I said, "Gentlemen," I said, "I'm going to pray and commit Ma Bird's spirit to the Almighty, and then why don't we all blow bubbles?" Signifying her spirit raising from earth and being joined to her Creator in heaven. And so I said the prayer, and then this one big, beefy man, just huge muscles, he reached out, grabbed a small bottle of the bubbles, blew a stream, and he went, "Goodbye, Ma Bird." And on the other side of the room, this man completely covered in tattoos, he blew a stream, and he went, "Tweet, tweet." And then they all started doing it. "Goodbye, Ma Bird, tweet, tweet. Goodbye, Ma Bird, tweet, tweet. Goodbye, Ma Bird." My whole office filled up with bubbles. The men didn't want to stop blowing bubbles. It was goofy and real and incredibly honouring. And then I made them several cups of tea with lots of sugar, because that's the British cure for shock. Well, news goes around a prison like wildfire. And when I look back, I realised that that was the point, that we became a community that loved and laughed and worshipped together. And I realised things had changed because of the segregation unit, the SEG unit, which is a prison within the prison. Men are locked up there for 23 hours at a time, and they spend most of their time with their hands on the bars, looking out over the compound and catcalling at everyone who walks past. No one's exempt. Not ministers, not grannies. The commissioner walked past one time and someone shouted out, "Nice rear end, Commissioner!" Of course, that's not exactly the words he used. But after that funeral, every time I walked past, there was absolute silence, which was the highest honour that those men could give me. But one time when I was walking past, someone cried out, "Will you bless us, chaplain?" And oh, it was my privilege, it was my honour to pray a blessing over all those men, no matter what faith group they came from. Well, I left about 2 years after that, and when I left, I did feel like that old warhorse. I was absolutely bone weary. I was exhausted. But I learned such a lot from my men. And I discovered something that British women have known for eons. And that is, you can't keep a good mama down, especially not when she makes a killer cup of tea. Thank you. Thank you very much.